Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Pedig Dalid, Halacha Hey, and Halacha Vav. We're going to be learning today Daf Membeis. We left off on Daf Membeis Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the top of the Amud in the beginning of the Gemara Rab Achai Boye. And what we're going to be doing in our sugyas first, we're going to be bringing the Shita of Rab Shimon that we'll have in its source later on Daf Samach Gimel, but we already quoted Rab Shimon on Daf Yud Zayin, Daf Yud Ches above, just to say the words in the intro, that Rab Shimon holds Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'eina Shaloi, which means that if you have, let's say, a field and you planted over there barley, and I go ahead and I plant a vineyard in my property near your field, and then I extend my vines mamish over your barley. Says Rab Shimon that since the other plant does not belong to me, ein adam magdish davar she'eina shaloi. Now we're going to learn more details about this halacha, shitas Rab Shimon later, but that's a general rule. We also therefore learned above on Daf Yud Zayin, ein adam chayvish davar she'eina shaloi. I'll repeat this halacha when we learn the Gemara inside. And we will see how this theoretically might be connected to the sugya that we began yesterday by learning halacha vav. What did we learn in halacha vav? The first din of the Mishnah is that after we establish shitas Beis Hillel, that 2 rows suffices the Beis Hillel to create a halachic vineyard, even if both rows do not belong to the same person, 1 row mine, 1 row yours. The case of the Mishnah was that I planted both, but since I planted 1 row in your property, we quoted the Gemara in Bava Metzia and Bavli, that if I plant something in your property, that product belongs to the landowner. Nevertheless, doesn't matter that it belongs to 2 people, it creates a kedem, which then will affect that anything planted, whether it's on my property, whether it's on my neighbor's property, and he planted his other stuff, even though normally if you only would have viewed each row for themselves, you only would need to have the 6 tvachim distance. And when you have that, then that other product would not create kilei hakedem. But now that you have a kedem, it becomes awesome. You get it? And therefore, does this not sound like our Mishnah is not following the Shita of Rab Shimon? Because maybe, according to Rab Shimon, Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'eina Shaloi, how can my vine and your vine, my row and your row, connect to prohibit either something that's planted on my property or something that's planted on your property, when part of what's making that problem is something that's not mine? Either mine is making yours asur, or your row of vine will make my barley asur. So that's going to be the Gemara's inquiry, whether our Mishnah is not l'kula alma. That will be more or less the sugya on Daf Membeis Amud Aleph. And then we're going to begin halacha vav. Now, it's just to remind everyone, right, that we already quoted halacha vav before, but now for us, it's going to be a great opportunity to properly review it. What's the topic of halacha vav? That after we discussed the minimum vines and rows that is needed to create a kedem, now the question is, how close together must a set of rows be in order for them to be combined to form the vineyard? Because there has to be a point that even though it's 2 rows, all on my property, all planted by me, if the distance between each row is that far, then they do not combine, and every row has a din of an individual geffen vine that you only have to have the distance of 6 tvachim. So that's going to be the topic of the Mishnah, and we're going to have in the Mishnah 2 types of arguments. There'll be 2 machlokes of Tanoim, but each one will focus on something else. First of all, we're going to have, according to the Tanakama, who's the ones who argue will be brought only at the end of the Mishnah. And that will be is that we differentiate between a 2-row kedem versus 3 or more row kedem. Kedem katan, kedem gadol. And as we'll see, chachamim, if it's only 2 rows, then for them to combine, it has to be under 8 amas, not 8 amas, a drop less than 8 amas. That means that if you have an 8 amas distance between each row, then they do not combine. If you have a kedem gadol, this is the shita that's brought in the beginning of the Mishnah, If you have a Kerem Gadol, then the distance between each row has to be under 16. And Chavre, indeed, we will see a link between this number 16 and the opening din of this Perek, Korachas HaKerem. If you remember, Lashitas, Beis Hillel, obviously Korachas HaKerem is not discussing the initial planting of a vineyard. Korachas HaKerem is speaking that after you already have a Kerem, and now you destroyed some rows in middle. You emptied out an area in the middle. So Beis Hillel, how much space do you need to have in that korachas for you to be allowed to plant in some of it a foreign plant? Beis Hillel 16 amas. We're going to see a correlation. Don't put that picture here at all. It's already getting way ahead of ourselves. We're going to get there later. Anyways, that's the Chachamim. And in contrast, I'm saying this by heart, that the Rabbi Meir and Rab Shimon, they're going to be brought only at the end of the Mishnah. They hold that we do not make any differentiation between 2 rows and 3 rows or more. The 8 amma is always the rule. In other words, if it's less than 8 ammas apart, they combine. If it's 8 ammas or more, then they don't combine. So that is one machlokes. Now let's go back to the Tanakama. Shitas Tanakama / Chachamim. That when it comes to a 8, there is a difference between 2 rows versus 3 rows or more. What's going to happen if you had 3 rows or more? You began with a Kerem Gadol. Let's go, you only had 3 rows. And for whatever reason, the Balabas removed the middle row. Now you only have 2 rows. So now there's another machlokes. Do we say that we continue to apply the system as it was when you planted this Kerem, and it was a 3-row Kerem? And therefore, if the 2 outer rows are within 16 amas, they combine, even though it's only 2, but it used to be 3? Or do we say, no, we look at it, Yerushalmi, that if right now you only have 2 rows, you have to follow the rule of under 8 amas versus 8 amas or more. And, the huge nafkamina, that will be 2. And that is a machlokes tanoim. Between the Chachamim, again, the Tanakama, the Mishnah, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the Kavanaki. It's going to be Gaval. So that's going to be halacha vav, guys, is going to take up the bulk of Daf Membeis. Mamash, it's almost an entire Amid in our small pagination. And just we're going to have time, God willing, to go ahead. And to go ahead, I just want to quote another Mishnah that we will have later that will be Negeya to our Sugi in the Gemara on the Mishnah. And that is that just like our Mishnah is focusing on the maximum space between rows, after which they do not combine. Now, Chavre, listen to these words. Similarly, there is also a minimum amount of empty space that's needed between rows, and that is the space of 4 amas for them to combine. We're going to learn more about this on Daf Mem Zayin, but it's logical. In other words, when people pack too many vines too close together, it also doesn't form a vineyard. And that also includes a minimum space needed between rows. And that will be a very good contrast, giving us the full picture. Benegeya Akerem, as God willing.
What happens if it's less than 4 amos?
Don't forget one thing, Kevin. I want to answer your question in a more broad way. Whenever you do not have a Kerem, you have vines, and there's a simple rule that you cannot plant a foreign seed within 6 tfachim. In other words, we become more lenient. The daladamis is only when you have a Kerem. Okay. And now let us begin. Chavran Daf Membeis Amud Aleph. We are beginning in the beginning of the Gemara, 5 lines to the top of the Amud. Then we're focusing back on the opening line of the Mishnah of Halacha Hey, that Hanoitei Ashura Achas B'toich Shaloi, the Shura Achas B'toich Shal Chaveiroi, which therefore halachically makes that Shura will belong to the Chaveiroi, so the 2 Shurais do not belong to the same person, etc., etc. So the Mishnah says they are combinable. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Achai inquired, or he asked, perhaps Leis Hada Pliga al Rabbi Shimon, is this not in disagreement with Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon, we have, as we mentioned on Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis, the din of Rabbi Shimon there is that if I spread my grapevine over my neighbor's standing grain, my neighbor's grain is not awesome. guys, there's a lot of nuance in what I said, and it's not a gaya all of it. But we have this general rule, and now we're quoting the words of Rab Shimon, that Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'ena Shaloi. I just also want to remind everyone that when we quoted this halach on Daf Yud Zayin, Daf Yud Ches above, we pointed out that even with Rab Shimon, this is not a hard and fast rule. As a great example that we quoted from Tosfos in Bavli, that if I were to mix my meat in your milk, and it's cooked together, and basar b'chala, very much like kilei akenem, is not only asur b'achila, it's asur b'hana. Your milk is also asur b'hana, even according to Rab Shimon. We're not going to go back into that sugya. Just so there's this case and there's that case, and there's a lot of nuance over here. But there is this general statement again of ein adam magdish davar she'ena shaloi. So now let's think about it. What's the case of our Mishnah? Let's say I have a land, and the Kavan has land, and I planted at the edge of my field one row, let's say of 3, and for whatever reason I made a mistake or not, doesn't no difference what my kavana was. I planted the next 2 vines in the next row in Kavan's property, and therefore Kavan, you owe those rows. You owe me money. How much money? Also not negated. So the Mishnah is saying, and the Mishnah doesn't quote a machlokes, that now we have a kedem. Now what does that mean, b'poyel mamish? That if I have in my vineyard, if I have beyond 6 tvachim, but within 4 amos, if I have a row of barley, that's me, or you, Kavan, if you have in your property, even beyond 6 tvachim, but within 4 amos, your row of barley, whichever direction, then it's going to become usher. That's what the Mishnah is saying. Now, think about it. If the Mishnah would be unanimous, then it wouldn't be, because Rab Shimon has to argue with it. Why? Because Rab Shimon holds ein adam magdish davar she'ena shaloi. And to create a kedem, since it belongs to 2 people, so if it's about the barley in my land, then it comes out, Kavan, that your row, not alone with my row, but also your row is creating a isur. Can be another magdash of Hashem shaloi, or my row, which is combining with your row, will make your barley asur. L'chayda, our Mishnah should not go according to Rab Shimon. And the Gemara right away has a comeback, but we're going to evolve the comeback. We're going to show that comeback is not so push. So for the opening liner of Rabbi, the Gemara says, no. Our Mishnah is unanimous, even Rab Shimon. And what will be the difference? So he says like this, over there, come on. Okay, we explain what that means. I have a kedem, and the case of the Mishnah actually was not even a kedem, even if I only have a single vine, but I spread the branches of my vine over your product, over your grain. So your grain is not asur b'hana. But over here, listen to the words, and there's so many different ways of understanding the words. It's not that Reuven's will aser Shimon's. It's not that way. No, the vineyard belongs to both of them. The vineyard belongs both to Kavan and to me. I am able to prohibit my own. Lit up Shimon. Of course, you, Kavan, you are able to prohibit what's yours. The vineyard belongs to both of us.
Am I just the case? Am I drawing or am I off? 3 and 2, the barley is within 6.
Exactly. And the barley, and the only thing you would add is that whether you put the barley in the owner B's field, or if you put the barley in the owner's A field, and the barley is beyond 6 tvachim, but within 4 amos, which is mamish the case. So the Gemara is saying no, that it's not one prohibiting the others. The owner A and owner B own both. So they're being magdish, that which belongs to them. Now, there's another way of learning the Gemara. I just want to give because we have enough time for this. I'm just going to say it now, and then you're going to have to learn the rest of the sugya also differently. But that point will be the other way of learning the Gemara is that there's a 1-step process, and then there's a 2-step process. A 1-step process is, in the case of Daf Samach Gimel, I have a vine, it's mine. You have a barley, yours. You have grain. I took my vine, the branches, and I spread it over your barley. Says Rab Shimon, I cannot aser yours. Okay, it's not physically touching, it's only over it. There's a lot of nuance here. But in that case, ein adam magdish davar she'ena shaloi. Over here, it's not. Here it's a two-step process. What's this two-step process? When there are two rows, one near the other, our Mishnah is saying, don't look about what it will do to something else. Even though the two rows belong to two different people, that's not a reason why they should not combine. The first step is that we combine them. The din of combining is not about asking anything yet. Now that they are combined, now that you have a kerem, so now step number two is not something that is happening directly from one on the other. Now that there's a kerem, it's planted within the kerem. When it's a two-step process, Rab Shimon is not bothered with Ein Adam Oised Davar She'eino Shaloi. Again, I'm going to put that to the side because I would speak more, and then we would have to go more. We don't have all of that time. But let me go back to the way we're learning our Gemara, according to the Noisei Kalim over here, according to the Rashi D'Iliyah, that Rab Shimon only says that A cannot aser something that belongs to B. But if A and B own something together, then they could aser something that belongs either to A or to B, because it's theirs. It's not only the others. Simple. Okay. Any combined ownership, that's the point, could forbid either partners, because it's not davar she'eino shaloi, it is shaloi. Hold on. Okay, now on this way of thinking, says the Gemara, you're not done yet. And let's go back now to Daf Yud Zayin, Daf Yud Ches. Avmana lo yomar kein. Why is that? L'chu'ura Avmana disagrees with the statement above. Where do we see that he would disagree with it? And if you would disagree with it, then again you would have to conclude that our Mishnah is not unanimous. Our Mishnah is not Rab Shimon. So let's remind ourselves of the Mishnah we had on Daf Yud Zayin, and then the sugya that we had on Daf Yud Ches. Let me remind the guys like this. Number one. Then just a chazar. If I have a field, and let's say my field is made out of wheat, and I want to plant only one row of barley. But my kavana of planting the row of barley is not because I really want the barley, but my intent is only to know whether the earth is suitable for barley for next season or for the following season. In other words, I'm testing out whether this product is good to come from this land, from this earth. So we learned like this in the Mishnah. For me to make one row, and it's obvious to the Marasayan, people don't plant only one row. They plant one row in the case that I'm talking about only if they're making a test. And when they're making a test, theoretically, you're better off. But the Mishnah says, I'm not allowed to plant a row in the middle of my field. Because then there is the issue of chavush. Chavush means, remember, that you can't have type A surrounding type B. That's not okay, even if it's a test. But the Mishnah says, if I'm planting a row of barley at the edge of my wheat field, since it's not chavushed, it's not surrounded, I have barley, wheat. Let me just be consistent. Wheat is the whole field. I want to know whether my earth is also good for barley for a later time. So the Mishnah says I'm allowed to plant one row at the edge of the field. No one argues with that. But now comes the machlekes in the Mishnah. What happens if I have a wheat field then, and I'm neighboring with you, and you have a wheat field? Am I allowed to plant one row of barley at the edge of my field? It's at the edge of my field, but you're my neighbor. If you were to look, you have wheat, I have wheat. Now the barley is in between wheat. That, according to the Tanakama, is prohibited. Said Rav Mana that according to Rab Shimon, it would be allowed. But why? He explained why would it be allowed? Because since Rab Shimon holds Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'eino Shaloi, subsequently he holds Ein Adam Chovesh Davar She'eino Shaloi. We don't combine me and you, and therefore we continue to look at the row of barley as if it's wheat and at the edge barley, and everyone knows it's for a test, and there's no issue with kilei zeroi. Huh? Chavush. Very good. Now the Gemara says Gavaldik. Now think about it. L'chu'ura, over there is also a partnership. In other words, it's not just Dan, it's Dan and me. What makes chavush? Chavush means that I have my wheat, you have your wheat, so there's wheat on both sides. And the Gemara of Mana is suggesting that the reason why Rab Shimon will allow for the barley to be planted at the edge is because we don't even combine at all. We don't give any credence to the neighbor, all based on Rab Shimon Shita Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'eina Shaloi. So therefore, Ein Adam Chavish Davar She'eina Shaloi. You understand? And now l'cha'ira, that's like our Mishnah, because we do not combine two people. The Rav Mana said it. So why are we combining two people? Let's read it inside. It says the Gemara l'cha'ura Rav Mana li'amar Kain Elo loy Kain Amar Rabbi Shmuel b'shem Rab Zeira. That when Rab Shimon who ruled in the Mishnah that we learned on Daf Yud Zayin, that I am allowed to plant in the case that I gave one row of barley at the edge of my wheat field, even though my neighbor has wheat planted. So it turns out that not in ownership-wise, but the Metzias, the barley will be in between wheat. The Tanakama says it's awesome. Oh, says Rab Shimon Mutter. And how did he explain the heter of Rab Shimon? The explanation was kedate. Kedate means l'shitasei. That Kamal, Rab Shimon Amar, the Gemara there, and Daf Yud Zayin, Daf Yud Ches quoted the Mishnah on Daf Samachim. Since Rab Shimon says in the case that we just spoke about, Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'eina Shaloi, Kainu Amar, therefore the same he applied, he linked Samachimel to Daf Yud Zayin, Ein Adam Chovish Davar She'eina Shaloi. So l'cho'ura, coming back to our Mishnah, if we don't even allow a combination to create chavush, so why would Rab Shimon allow two rows that belong to two different people to create a link of a kerem to ased davar she'ena shaloi? Says the Gemara, still I'll stand my ground. It's still not the same. Yes, on Daf Yud Zayin, in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin, yes, you are right to link it to Rab Shimon. Come on over there, since Rab Shimon holds on Daf Samachim, Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'eina Shaloi. Think about the case on Daf Yud Zayin. Dan, I own by myself my wheat. My neighbor Dan owns by himself his wheat. There's no partnership there. What's on mine is mine. What's on yours is yours. And therefore, we are correct to say that since Rab Shimon holds Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'eina Shaloi, you don't have a metzias of chavush because we don't take the neighbor into account. Because the neighbor has no ownership in my field, nor do I have in his field at all. But over here, they are partners. But over here, they're partners how? Not in ownership. They are partners in the halachic kedem. It's when I went ahead and I planted a row on my field, and I planted my second row by mistake or on purpose on Kavan's field. We are partners in the kedem. Since like a couple of steps. Number one, the fact that it belongs to two people, it doesn't disallow it to be connected. It is connected. Once there is a connection, we view my row and his row as a kedem. We both are partners in a kedem.
They both own the field.
Even though technically I owe one row and you owe the other row, but since halachically these rows were planted in a configuration that it creates a kedem, we both own the kedem. Once we both own the kedem, we're going back to the original answer that we just learned. When does Rab Shimon say Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'eina Shaloi? If the vine is only mine, the standing grain is only yours, then I cannot be Magdish yours. But if the vine is both of ours, that vineyard, whichever part of it, could be Magdish, your grain or my grain. Let's read it in sign. Let me just read the words. Okay, Shaloi v'shel chaveiroi mitzarfen lesser esoam soy. I think it's beautiful. Yes, Yakir. What's the question?
So according to Rabbi Shimon, in the case of Bava Metzia, Shelo Midato, that would be.
So why are you quoting Bava Metzia? I want to stop. Why are you quoting about the Bava Metzia?
No, because you were talking about partners, right? So in case that
no, I was not talking about partners. I quoted Bava Metzia just to point out.
No, now we're talking about. Now I understand.
Okay. You're going to something new. Okay, talking about partners, yeah.
Now we're talking about partners, right? What if the part, according to Rabbi Shimon, if the partner, if the owner land they were sitting Shalom Midato, was he considered to be a shutaf now or no?
The answer is Yakir.
My question?
Externally, they're not partners. In the actual vines, they're not partners because my robe belongs to me. Your robe belongs to you. There is a partnership in the halachic kedem. This is very deep.
And if you put a wall, you're good, right?
We actually learned in the Mishnah that not only does two owners not discombine, even if there is a wall that's under 10 tfachim, that was the Mishnah. They still combine. If there's a wall of 10 tfachim, then even if it belongs to one person, they do not combine. But this is a gavaldik nuance over here. In other words, are they partners? If you're going to ask a question in a basin of Choshen Mishpat, no, they're not partners. Why not, Yakir? Because I own my robe. You own your robe. You don't get to take any of the grapes of my robe. I don't get to take any of the grapes of your robe. But when it comes to that concept, to the halacha of kedem versus gefen versus a vine, we are partners in the kedem. I think about it. Okay. Moving on to the next Mishnah halacha vav. And as we spoke at in the introduction, all of this is following Beis Hillel. Yes, we have to have 2 rows minimum. One has to have 3. One has to have 2. In the configuration of Shtayim Keneged Shtayim Ba'achas Yoitze Zanat, we have that. However, we're going with the Rash or the Rambam. But there's another question. The question is, there has to be a point where when these 2 rows were planted so far apart, you don't combine them, even if they belong to one person. So what is that limit? So again, the Tanakama will make a chiluk between 2 rows versus 3 rows or more. And we already have the verbiage of the Gemara between a Kerem Katan and a Kerem Gadol. Says the Holy Mishnah. If the vineyard is only comprised of 2 rows, then yes, there is a max distance. Beyond that, they do not combine. What is that? Under 8 versus 8 and more. If there is less than 8 amas, 9.99 is fine. Then lo yavi zera l'sham. Why not? Because you have yourself a bona fide kedem. It's not enough to distance it 6 tfachim. What is the Mishnah talking about then? Same whether you want to plant in between. Same if you want to plant in either side beyond. No difference. You have to have 4 amas. However, but finished. So it's under 8. But that's only if it's a kerem katan. Hoyu shalish. Shalish doesn't mean only 3. If you have a vineyard that's comprised of 3 rows or more, now there's a whole different shear, not between the outermost ones. I made that mistake when we learned Daf Yud Zayin, and then we corrected. No, between each row. Since it's a larger vineyard, we view that area already like a vineyard. And to not combine them, you need a lot more space. What's a lot more space? Double. Under 16 versus 16. If you don't have 16, then you combine them. Again, daf mem beis, amid beis. Since you combine them, came on the words in the Mishnah is lo yavi zera l'sham. You may not introduce any foreign seed there. Where's the veer? The veer is either in between the rows or in the area outside of the rows, even though, again, pshita, that's 6 tfachim, there's no talk about, no need to say you can't do it in 6 tfachim. No, now you have yourself a kenem.
All right, 16 amos is between the 2 outer rows or between each row?
Between each row. Now, I want you to know, this is something that gets complicated, but just to be aware of, that there is a potential link between this 16 amos and the opening Mishnah of this chapter, that when you have a emptied out space, cleared out in middle of a vineyard, korachas hakerem, what does Beis Hillel say? 16 amos. It's the same, but it's not mamish the same. Be'en kanamakim. But if you want to look in the Marafulda at the end of Daf Mem Beis Amud Aleph, if you want to look at the Rashirilio, they have disagreements about it. There's a lot of talk about that, but it's not again to the essence of the halach. The point
what do we differentiate between if it's plowed or if it's barren?
No. You're looking at the picture and we didn't even get there. So you're getting ahead of yourself. It's not a good there. In other words, 2 and 3. Then now, Before we're going to quote that I've made in Shimon, that they say there's no difference between 2 and 3. It's only 8 amas, under 8 amas. Before we get there, that's the way that Rebbe was Masader the Mishnah. Now he goes into a side case of this Yisrael. 2 is different than 3. Okay, what were to happen if you began with 3 or more? Let's go with 3. You had 3 rows, and for whatever reason, the owner removed the middle row. He moved any row. In other words, now you only have 2. So think of it. I just want to speak about it. When you had 3 Kevan, and don't forget, you had in between the rows, let's say you had 15 amas. Can't plant anything in between, nor on the other sides, because you have a keter. Now that you remove the middle row, I want to go that case. You remove the middle row, just as an example, because I want to use both in middle and outside. How much space do you have between the outer and the outer? I give a bad example. I take that back. Take it back. You had a row. Let me go. You left 4 amas. You left 4 amas. You planted the middle row. You left 4 amas and you planted the outer row. Or you did 5, 5, 5. Let's go 5, which is fine. You left 5 amas between each row.
I mean, there's a total of 10 between the 2 outer
Total
ones?
of 10 amas. A great example. And now you remove the middle row. Now you have 10 amas. When this was planted, it was classified as a Kedem Gadol. As a Kedem Gadol, even if you're only looking at the 2 outermost rows, still within. If you look at it as now it's a 2-row Kedem, by a 2-row Kedem, then if it's not under 8 amas, they don't b'chlal combine. Now the question is, will you say that you still have a Kedem? Why is it? Because it's within 16 amas, Danny, and this was a Kedem Gadol, even though now it became a 2-row, the rules continue, or not. And the Mishnah, in other words, when the Mishnah quotes Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, in the name of Rabbi Hananya ben Chachinoi, just make no mistake that the Tanakama argues with this. He's saying something that is not agreed with the Tanakama. And he says that even if Charva Tzois, okay, row 5 amas, you have 3. Even if now you remove the middle one, you removed it got removed by nature, doesn't make a difference. Now there's only 2 rows. Now you only have the 2 external rows. And the example that we gave is that they're only 10 amas apart. In other words, they're not 16 amas or more. They are still under the rule of the Kedem Gadol. You still have a Kedem. It still is a Kedem. And therefore, Liyavi Zera L'Sham. You cannot place a Zera there in the middle space. She'ilu mitchilasa neta'an. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov was explaining his chiddush. If lechatchila you would have chosen to plant only a 2-row vineyard, in your mind it's a vineyard. Halachically, it would not be, because if you plant only 2 rows in this configuration where you have 10 amas apart, you muted. Why? Because you have 8 amas or more. B'shmeina amas. Nevertheless, once it already had the status of a Kedem Gadol, I don't care if it now has only 2 rows, this stringency remains. All of this is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, meaning that according to the Tanakama, now that you have 10 amas, in other words, you have 8 amas or more, you don't even need a 10 amas, now there's no more Kedem. Used to be a Kedem, and if you remove the middle row in this configuration, now you lost the whole Torah of a Kedem. Now let's go weiter. Haniteas karmai sheish esrei al sheish esrei amas. Okay, sheish al sheish. We're not talking about a square. I know the lashon. It means no matter how many rows you have, you always left 16 amas. In other words, the Mishnah is applying the rule that we had in the beginning. In other words, I can have 100 rows, and there's exactly 16, but it's not under 16. Since it's not a Kedem, mutter lahavi zera l'sham. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, and now, by the way, just to say, Dan, only if it's not going within 6 tfachim. But the Mishnah doesn't even have to say that. Says Rabbi Yehuda, story happened in the city called Salmon. That were the intervals that he gave, and Sa'ar with a samach is sa'ar with a sin, a hair, a branch, Here, okay, when you can put up the picture, Sa'ar, Shtei Shturas Litzad Echad, Vizereya Sanir, Ubashana Ha'acheres, Hoyohifech Seir Lamokem Azera, Vizereya Sabur. So just a couple of steps over here. First of all, this guy had a vineyard. He knew he was a learned person, and he knew that as long as they are apart, the required 16 amas, number one, you don't have a halachic kerem, which means then that you are allowed to plant in the area in between as long as you don't go into the 6 tfachim. If you look good at the picture that Art Scroll made, he did it gavaldik. You'll see that look at the dark area. That's where you'll notice it. The dark area doesn't go all the way up until the vines. You have that little white area, that's 6 tfachim. Okay, so that's not. Now, another agricultural, practical issue. When you overplant an area, the land gets tired and it does not replenish its nutrients. So it's not uncommon that when people pack in an area, they alternate. The plan of this farmer was to do such a thing. So take a look at the picture. So one year, area A is barren, area B, plowed means plowed and planted. Area C, he's leaving barren, D, plow and planted. E, barren, and F, plowed and planted. And the next year, he's going to alternate. He's going to plow A, C, and E, and he's going to leave barren B, D, and F. That is not halachically. That is something that's just a case of what at Misa. Why? Simply to allow the earth, you're packing it in both with vines, and you're using every inch for other product. Crop rotation. Now, one final halach. Even though, correctly so, guys, because of this guy's knowledge of halacha, and he left exactly what was needed, 16 amas, right? Another little nuance. Yeah, he left 16 amas between the areas. I'll tell you something else. You're not allowed to plant a foreign product under the branches of a vineyard. You're not allowed to do that. So this guy who wants to plant all the way up to 6 tfachim, the branches of the vines then will protrude. This guy wants to use all of the area. So he has a solution. His solution is that if you have to know how to trellis properly, how to direct the branches. He made sure that in every given year, the area that he's choosing to plow and plant will have no vines going over it, because he has the vines going over the other direction. Now you appreciate the picture. You can see the trellis. You got it? I also want to point out that whoever's looking at the art scroll, don't gasp at the 14 amas number that he's writing. No, it's 16 amas. Why is it 16 amas? Because as long as you have from the trunk of the vine, row 1, to the trunk of 2, 16 amas, as long as you have 16 amas, guys, from the trunk of row 2 to the trunk of row 3, that's what you have. The only reason why whoever's looking at the picture sees number 14, of course, because a tefach is an amma. You have to leave a tefach. So it's 14 plus 1 is 16, just to make that clear. Right. In other words, the area that you will be allowed to plant then is not 16. Because of the basic rule, you have to leave it a tefach apart. The point of what he did is that he decided that as long as he can be certain that the seyar or the sa'ar, which means literally the hair, which means the branch, won't be overhanging any of the plowed planted area, then he's mamash chopping arayin and using every inch of the field. So this is what happened.
So he's planted the trunk of the plant is area B.
Not the plant, the trunk of the vines between one row and the other has exactly 16 amas. That's all we care about.
It's planted on the row.
Very good. So
but it points into the barren area.
No, yeah, because he wants to be able to plant in the plowed area without the concern that maybe the vines will go beyond and go beyond the 6 tvachim. Okay. In other words, the point that we are making over here is that not just in halacha, but halacha l'maisa, that as long as you have exactly 16 amas, no, it's not ad b'chlal. We're making clear. As long as you have 16 amas or more, and this guy has 6-7 rows, you can have 100 rows. Doesn't matter how many rows you have. Halachically, you don't have a vineyard. Now, we're going to go back to the opening case. Who told you there's a share of 16 amas? The Chachamim of the Mishnah. Even though they also say that if you have 2 rows, then under 8 amas. So they differentiate between 2 and 3 rows. Says the Mishnah, I want you to know that both Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir oimrim that even they're very lenient, just like when it comes to a kerem cotton. If it's 8 amas apart, you don't have yourself a vineyard. It has to be within. Even if you have 3 rows, 4 rows, 1,000 rows, same thing. Mutter. A lot more about Shitas Rav Meir and Rav Shimon in the Gemara. I thought I'm going to get ahead a little bit. Doesn't matter. We'll stop over here. I don't want to have to be rushed. It's Hanukkah. And God willing, we'll begin tomorrow with the Gemara. Gavaldik.
Very nice. Thank you.
Great. Mama's great.